Welcome to Journey to Joy Live, a podcast to promote wellness, resilience, and inspire joy. Be empowered to balance your mental, physical, financial, aspirational, and social health while providing mental health awareness and breaking down the stigma of mental illness in the Black community. I'm your host, Dr. If Joy, and I'm here to help you transform life's challenges into opportunities for joy. Let's begin the journey together. Hey everyone, happy Juneteenth. We're in episode 103. This is Your Brain on Oppression, the science of racial trauma and the fight for joy. And I have very special guest, Dr. Negar Fani. She is a clinical neuropsychologist at Emory. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here on Juneteenth of all days.
Yes, very, very special day. So tell us more of who you are and how you got into this research.
Yeah, so I am a clinical neuropsychologist by training, and I'm a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Emory University. And I've been doing neuroscience research for over 17 years. And the focus of my research has been people with post-traumatic stress disorder. And because of the place that I started my work, which is the Grady Trauma Project. So this is the longest running study of trauma in the nation. And it is based out of Grady Memorial Hospital, which for those who don't know, this is a publicly funded hospital in downtown Atlanta. And a lot of the people at the hospital, and I'm not talking about psychiatric patients, I'm talking about just generally people who come in, many of them are Black. And the focus of the people who have been coming through Grady Trauma Project are just patients at the hospital waiting to be seen, who have consented to be part of our trauma studies. And it used to be one study, it's now many studies. I'm one of several investigators who are part of the project. It's been an honor to be doing work with people who have experienced a lot of trauma, inclusive of trauma in their lives. But it's also amazing to see the many ways in which people are resilient and continue to live their lives and thrive in the face of chronic adversity. So exactly, inspiring work.
Yes, that's very important to see. I mean, because that's all I talk about is, how can we experience joy in the face of trauma, joy in the face of challenges, resilience despite challenges and trauma and all those things. And now we're talking about racial trauma because that's huge. I don't talk about racial trauma a lot, because it's everywhere. We experience it. But the fact that you do the research, you can say, here, this is what you can do to kind of combat it, or this is what your brain shows when you experience it. It was very important to have you here today, especially on this special day. So you have a research project. Can people or research study, can people sign up? Are you looking for people to sign up?
Yeah, we just started a brand new study that's funded by the National Institutes of Health. Looking at how daily experiences of discrimination, how they emerge and what places they emerge, how frequently they emerge, and also how you cope mentally with it. So I'm interested in the moment coping. And so we ask people to collect, daily diary experiences on an app on their phones. And they also wear a Fitbit. We look at their body responses and their mental coping responses to different types of stressors. We also look at brain imaging data that's collected after 1 month. So
I'm interested in.
Yeah. So we ask about experiences of racial trauma that are actually played back to folks while they're in the scanner. So they're imagining the situation.
Wow.
So parts of the brain light up as people are thinking about something that was stressful for them.
Wow. And do you compare, so that you mentioned daily discrimination, which obviously can include racial trauma. Do you compare that kind of discrimination and that kind of trauma with different kinds of trauma, like another kind of trauma?
We do, yeah. So we ask people to talk about not only racial discrimination, but other types of trauma to see if there are differences from a brain perspective, a physiological perspective.
Wow. Well, we're going to jump right in. So what does racial trauma actually do to the brain? And of course, I'm curious to know how it looks from a different kind of trauma, like a sexual or abusive trauma or just something that's not racial.
Well, the word trauma itself is an
Yeah.
umbrella term. So
Mhm.
there is not one type of trauma. There are so many different kinds.
Mhm.
And I'm interested in the nuances, the differences between being excluded from a job opportunity and the pain that arises from that kind of
Yeah.
discrimination versus hearing a racial slur.
Mhm.
These are very different types of things, so they can affect people in different ways. But one of the things, if I want to speak more broadly on the data that we have so far on the frequency of racial trauma, like we've been able to see cross-sectionally, people have given us reports of like how often they've experienced trauma, and we look at that in relation to their brain scan data. And we can see that people who've had more frequent racial trauma seem to have more engagement of regulatory parts of the brain.
Mm.
Prefrontal cortex is a part of the brain that's involved with processing emotions and suppressing emotions. So it's about helping us regulate in difficult circumstances.
Mhm.
So oftentimes we see that people who've had more racial trauma, they have kind of a greater response in these regulatory brain areas. And it shows kind of like you're having to work really hard to
Mm.
manage your emotional response and maybe
Mm.
suppress feelings of anger so that you can get through a situation effectively
Wow.
without making it worse.
Yeah.
That's one thing we've seen. Another thing we've seen is that racial trauma makes people more vigilant to those types of events. And that sort of lights
Of
up an area
course.
of the brain that's involved with environmental sensitivity to environmental cues and threat.
Mhm.
It makes people more vigilant. So you're preparing yourself. You're trying to figure out a way to avoid future racist encounters. So you might be preparing yourself both in terms of where you're going,
Yeah.
but you might be trying to sort of avoid particular encounters with people that
Mhm.
you might make a comment or something like that. It can manifest in different ways, but hypervigilance is one way, and heightened engagement of those regulatory areas of the brain. So that's two big ways.
For sure, and in the second one, the hypervigilance, I mean, that's a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder, so you can literally have PTSD going through trauma, especially if you had some type of encounter with police or discrimination or anything like that. The regulatory, that's interesting because a lot of times we might feel like when we experience this trauma that we're not holding it together, that we're not able to regulate and control our emotions. So the fact that it's firing off is great because it looks like our body is naturally trying, but it
It's
does come to a point where you probably can't anymore.
Well, that's the thing. So it's really adaptive to be able to regulate yourself so that you
Mhm.
get through the situation. But our brains are not designed to do this all the time. And over time, this produces what Dr. Arlene Geronimus has described as weathering of the brain. So it
Mm.
produces actually a degradation of brain
Mhm.
areas that are involved with regulatory capacities. And when that happens, you do start to lose control. You do
Wow.
lose control over your eating. Like, let's say, for example, you do lose control over your ability to sort of inhibit impulses to like grab a drink or do other things that suppress the distress of the moment, but in the long term can lead to like greater health vulnerabilities. So, metabolic syndromes, cardiovascular disease, and also neurological problems like Alzheimer's disease affect Black
Mm.
populations twice as much as white. And I think that this is a great cause, is this kind of what we call high effort coping that comes from racial trauma. And this is not a term that I came up with. Um, my
Wow.
not contemporaries, but people who have come before me, racial scholars like Dr. Chester Pierce, Dr. William Smith, who is my contemporary, coined the term racial battle fatigue. It's the stress of everyday, mundane, extreme environmental stress that gets to
Yeah, when it's
people,
constant, chronic.
wears them away, and I think
Mhm.
creates vulnerabilities to brain health problems down the road.
Right. And, you mentioned that there has been some comparison to other kinds of traumas. Are these the top 2 that you would see in another type of trauma, or it's different?
Yeah, so, I think when it comes to certain types of trauma where people have more of this fearful or anxious kind of response, we see a greater response in like the amygdala, for example. The amygdala is our
Mm.
fear center of the brain. And we have seen less kind of hyperactivity of the amygdala with racial trauma, but we
Mm-hmm.
see a lot more engagement in prefrontal regulatory areas of the brain,
Mm.
vigilance, areas of the brain. This is the occipital cortex. This is a part of the brain that's involved with detection of environmental cues, things that
Mm-hmm.
are in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but this kind of fearful manifestation of post-traumatic stress, we don't see that as much. We see more of a disconnection. So
Mm.
people disconnecting from their bodies, maybe having a tuning out, withdrawing from their body. This
Mm.
I think a real defining feature of many types of racial trauma is people after some time, they're not as fearful or hypervigilant as they become sort of shut down, tune out from themselves,
Yeah. Yeah.
disconnected from their body signals, and that causes problems.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And there's different ways that people respond. I mean, my friend is watching now. She'll relate to this. I mean, going back to when we were younger, like I would always avoid, right? Or stick my head in the sand. Like I'm just like, it's not happening to me, or I don't pay attention because I've always been like this optimistic person, joy, 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 to the point where I don't realize it's happening. People are like, oppression happens. This happened to you. Don't you feel discriminated? I'm like, well, sure, I might be discriminated against, but I mean, that's not going to steal my joy. And they would literally get mad at me, like, why aren't you mad? So, like, there's different people where there's that level of resilience or joy or optimism. Then there's those people that's like, look, I'm angry, I'm gonna be angry, and it's gonna happen to me. Now, have you mentioned looking at resilience, and especially over the years, because
Yeah.
even way back, before 1865, while this was happening, slavery was happening, we had to be resilient. We had to fight through it and do all the things and be humble. But what's your work on resilience?
So I think the work that I do on resilience is helping people connect with themselves. So
Good.
we have intervention studies that are designed to help people connect with their inner selves, and that
Yeah.
includes like your body signals. We
Yeah.
call this interoception. So interoception means your awareness of your body signals like hunger, thirst, whether you're hot or cold. Being able to be attuned to your body and what it
Mm-hmm.
needs is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people who really are able to connect with their bodies in the moment and respond to your body's needs do
Mm-hmm.
some of the best. So I have an intervention that sort of helps people connect with their bodies in the context of
Oh,
meditation. Yeah.
yeah.
So we have a special device that helps people connect with meditative, like breath focused meditation. It's a device that vibrates in proportion to the breath on the sternum. So
Mm.
as you breathe, you feel your breath as a vibration.
Mm.
And what that does is help you feel your breath in a way that is less subtle. Like when
Mm-hmm.
you meditate, it's really hard to focus, and it helps you connect with your body. So I think that this body connectedness is one way to help connect with the self. When we're connected with the self, we can connect with other people.
Mm-hmm.
When we're disconnected from the self, it's really hard to, be present
Yeah.
with people, make social connections. If people feel like you're tuned out or spaced out, and that's one
Exactly.
of my goals, as a researcher, as a psychologist, to help
Mm-hmm.
people connect with themselves. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a pathway through which people can find connection with others. But I think in general, people who have more social connections and validation from their social structures,
Mm-hmm.
that can be one of the biggest paths to resilience.
Nice.
Having people around you that you can connect with and say, like, this
Makes
happened
sense.
to me. And like, that was a bunch of, BS.
Right. Especially people who understand or have been through it too.
I think we probably both have experienced that, coming out of maybe a meeting and having a friend that you can text with and be like, did you? And they're like, yeah. And you don't have to say much, but they understand what you feel. That
Mm-hmm.
validation goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. We've all experienced that in our friend circles, all kinds of circles. Black people wanting to be around Black people or wanting a Black physician or Black, Black, Black. And speaking of that, when I first met you, you're like, well, people always ask me, why are you doing Black research? You're not Black. And you told me this wonderful story,
Oh,
your story, if you
yeah.
don't mind telling your story about how you got into
Yeah, so
research.
for those who don't know, I'm Persian, Iranian. That's my nationality. And I grew up in the South. So I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. And at the time that I was growing up, there were really no Iranians around. And it was pretty homogenous. And I experienced a lot of racism myself, both overtly, racial slurs. But I think the kind of racism I experienced that was the most painful was kind of being excluded from social circles, having people tell me to go back to my country, which is interesting because I was born here.
Yeah, this is your
Those kinds of
country.
things. Right. So the first friend that I made, which I'll never forget in kindergarten, this was a Black girl. And I will never forget that she was the only one who wanted me in her circle, who wanted me around. And I think that from then on, I understood, the value of having someone who also experienced what it's like to be othered, even though we don't have the exact same background. And in a community where there aren't a lot of people of color, the Black community I found to be like among the most welcoming and understanding. Even though we didn't have the exact same experiences, we did kind of have some types of experiences. So I think I felt a lot more seen and understood, and by my friends of color. And those are the people that I flock to. I think I continue to flock to professionally as well.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. So, when there's a long-term effect of racial trauma, have you noticed long-term versus short-term what the effects are on Black individuals?
Yeah, I think for children, it can be especially hard if you don't have someone who is there to say, like, yeah, this is what happened to you wasn't because of something that you did wrong. I think that there's a lot of variability in how it can affect kids, but having what we call racial socialization makes a big difference. To have your caretakers, your parents talk to you and say, prepare you for what society is like, and to help kids identify things as being othered, experiencing discrimination, naming it can be really freeing, because many times kids will experience discrimination, like inclusive of being in schools by teachers, being cast in a different light, not being given the same opportunities. It can really sting and have an effect, but it's going to be a lot less if your parents, caretakers, trusted adults tell you that this is not you, and they take action. People who are willing to stand up for you. It makes a huge difference.
It really
But kids
does.
notice it early on, and they just don't know what it is. They can feel it in their body. And what can cause depression, anxiety, mental health problems is not knowing what this is. It's something that they're carrying around with them, but they don't know if it's something that they did wrong, that they're getting cast aside in social groups, that their teacher keeps either not giving them opportunities or labeling their problems as like aggressive, some other type of issue, or placing the blame on them when it was another kid that sort of did something wrong. There are all sorts of things that can happen if you don't know what's going on. It can be a source of deep depression, anxiety. And I think it's very freeing to have a caregiver say, like, this is not you. And I'm going to be talking to your teacher, parents, friend, whoever about it.
And validation is key. And kids who are growing up in households where they don't have that validation, or they don't have a parent, maybe they're in foster care, wherever they are, and they have no one that's on their side, it's definitely detrimental to their mental health for sure. I see.
And it's a luxury to have the space to even talk about these things. Like when we think about all these contemplative conversations, they can only occur in the context of time and space, like having a dinner conversation. But if you have overburdened family, like people who are working several jobs don't have the time to have these conversations.
There.
It may not be a lack of intention, but just a
Yeah.
lack of time and resources, the capacity to have these conversations. So I don't think it's incumbent upon just the teachers. I think it's schools and communities that need to
Hmm.
be helpful to kids.
Yeah, so awareness and this research is definitely great for sure. So, what does the science say about how people can heal from racial trauma?
I think there's not one path. There are many paths.
For sure.
There are many scientists, therapists who talk a lot about the value of somatically based therapies. So, somatically based therapies are basically like mind body types of therapy, and there are
Hmm.
many different kinds. The kinds of studies that I'm interested in are mindfulness based studies, but mindfulness is one type of mind body intervention. There's
Yeah.
things like loving kindness meditation. There are culturally adapted, somatically oriented therapies. There's trauma informed yoga. So I think that having a mind body approach can be particularly helpful, because I think that racial trauma affects not only the mind, but the connection with the body. And I think focusing on the body can be a great source of healing. Um, and I can't say again the value of social structures and validation. So
Yeah.
they can be anything. They can be a church for some people, or they could be like a book club for others.
Hmm.
It's about who you feel is your tribe, who you can trust,
Hmm.
who is going to validate your experience versus tell you like, oh, are you sure that wasn't you?
Yeah, yeah. Was that
That's
your fault? Did you deserve that? Or what did you do to
right.
have
Like
that happen?
that's really damaging. But
Hmm.
being in a community of people who are just going to be like, uh-huh, yeah, I understand. I've been there. I see you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is some great stuff. And like in thinking about like the social connectedness, being able to have a community. What about people who just don't have it? I guess that's where the mindfulness comes in at, because I talk about mindfulness and changing your mind and being able to reframe your thoughts all the time, right? And it can be helpful even in the midst of the storm or the discrimination that's around you.
Yes.
It can be helpful. But I do recognize that to a certain extent, I have patients, of course, saying, but that doesn't change my environment. It's not supposed to, but because I can't change my environment, I still feel the mental illness and effects of it.
So I think one element of mindfulness that doesn't get discussed a lot. So
Mhm.
mindfulness, just briefly, is about non-judgmental, present-centered awareness. And we
Oh.
can do that in a lot of different ways. But the key element that I think can work with racial trauma is the non-judgmental aspect. So it's about
Mhm.
noticing things like your thoughts and emotions without judging them.
Mhm.
So it is very much about acknowledging, accepting, being compassionate towards your own
Yeah.
experience. And I think that can be one of the most damaging aspects of racial trauma, is the self-invalidation that happens
Mm.
when society around you isn't validating experience. Like, let's say something happens in a social setting and no one acknowledges it, then
Mhm.
it's incumbent upon the person who experienced that racial trauma to try to understand the experience in a way. And many
Mhm.
times people invalidate their own experience because there's no one saying or showing a reaction to what happened. So they might be like, oh, well, maybe that was just me. Like um, maybe I did something to do. Maybe this has
Not
nothing to do
judging.
with racism. And
Mm.
that struggle of that can be invalidating, is many times a direct reaction to the outside environment also invalidating you. And mindfulness is very much about noticing your reactions and not judging them, but accepting them as your own,
Yeah.
and that they are real and true, and it's part of your experience.
Yeah.
We should
It's so
not.
easy to judge.
So easy, so
Yeah.
easy. To blame the self is
Mhm.
one of the most common things I see in the clinic, especially people blaming themselves for things
Mhm.
that happen to them.
Yeah. Any differences between the folks who every single thing is a race thing. I pull the race car every time
Uh,
versus
uh-huh.
those who are like, well, like how I said I am. The race car is kind of, I don't even think about it, you know. Any differences, because in thinking about that judgment thing, I can see that going both ways. Not judging yourself, but also not judging the situation all the time for what you think it is when it could not be that or may not be that.
Mhm. I mean, there are many times where we can't really tell like what someone's intention is, right? And I think the goal isn't necessarily to be a
Mhm.
detective and to say like what is true or what is not. The
Yeah.
fact is your experience is your experience. And
Mhm.
if you're feeling angry,
That's good.
you need to honor that and
Mm.
say like, yeah, I do feel anger, and finding a way to express it versus internalize it can be make the biggest difference between depression and being able to let something go and move on.
Ah.
So internalized anger is something that we see that actually accelerates aging. So we have some research that shows that
Wow.
internalizing your anger accelerates biological aging, and ruminating on an experience, reliving it over and over. This is one of our studies that came out last year, was that racial trauma can lead to a heightened engagement in pathways of the brain that are involved with rumination, living through something like a loop over and over.
Mhm.
And that in turn is related to accelerated biological aging. So even though
Wow.
you may be 40 years old, your body is 60 years old. And I
Ooh.
think that internalizing your anger can really be a part of that accelerated aging. And one of the best things that we can do is simply acknowledge it. It doesn't matter
Mhm.
what the intention was, or, you know, we're not here to be detectives. We're here to
Mhm.
say, my feelings are important and valid, and
Mhm.
need a friend to come say that to you and help you out, great. Or if you need to journal about it, great.
Or a
But
therapist.
exactly. But
Therapists will understand.
it's true. But even if you don't have a therapist, finding some outlet to express
Yeah.
it will actually help you let it go and move on for your own health.
Ooh, that's some good stuff. Because we know we have some people just internalizing that anger, and then all of a sudden it pops, you know, and that can look in different ways. But especially, yeah, aging affects a lot of different things, especially medically, as far as the heart, and you're more susceptible to illnesses like diabetes and
Yeah.
infection and things like that. So you're getting sick. So of course, if your body is taking the attack, of course it's going to affect aging. So
Yeah.
that
It
makes sense. So it's
cases.
important to name it, like you said, validate yourself. It's okay. Now, what do I do with this anger now that I have it?
Exactly. Exactly. Find an outlet for it. Don't eat it, and don't white knuckle it. I think that this is one of the things that I try to talk to people about the most, is like white knuckling it. You may think that it's not doing anything to your body, but it is. Your body is feeling it, your heart is feeling it, your brain is feeling it. And find an outlet for it, validate it. And this is the way that you can sort of keep going and move on.
Mhm.
Um, so physical things, again, somatically oriented interventions, I have the most faith in.
Oh, yeah, I'm always talking about exercise, so that's huge.
I mean, exercise, you know, it sounds kind of trite because exercise is also a luxury for many people, like having time to
Mhm.
exercise,
Oh gosh, right, the
having
time.
the right, yeah, having time, having a place to do it, you know, like having
Mhm.
equipment and all that stuff. But we know that exercise is one of the biggest factors in preserving cognitive health, emotional health. The people who exercise on a regular basis not only live the longest, but live the healthiest. So,
Yeah,
but it's easier said than done, you know, just telling
yeah,
someone to exercise when they have 3 jobs and,
yeah.
you know, like they live kind of in an urban jungle. It's like hard
Mhm.
to find a place to do it, you know. That's where we have to have social structures in place to
For
help
sure. I
with.
love how you said that because that is so true. Like, not everybody has the access or especially the time. Because I definitely work with my patients when I prescribe exercise to my patients. I
Mhm.
try to work with them on details on how to get it in, what
Yes.
time, do you have staircases? Go up and down your stairs, because not everybody has a backyard or it's not safe for them to go outside. But these days we can
Exactly.
access apps, free apps. YouTube is free. There's different workout plans that they can do from their phones or from their TV in their homes that can definitely be very helpful. And of course, not everybody can work out because of some type of physical disability, but there's definitely still other ways as well. So don't count yourself out of exercise. It's definitely possible. It's a matter of coming up with that plan that works for you.
Yeah, being creative as much as, this is the work that I do in therapy, is to
Mhm.
help people find creative solutions, just like you were describing. And
Mhm.
one thing that I do talk to people about is like an exercise snack. Um, this is something that I do. It's like a 7 to 8 minute time period where you're doing
Mm.
some kind of exercise that's fun for you. And it's just, you can do it in whatever small space you have,
Love it.
like sit-ups or push-ups or just something that you enjoy. And
Ooh,
it's
that
a
goes a long way.
snack, but it
That's so
actually
cute.
has an effect.
Yeah, doing that 3 times 10 minutes a day, we say 30 minutes of, getting your heart rate up during exercise helps, so 3 10-minute increments.
You
And my
can do
husband just found, I think it's 10 minutes, this ab workout, and it's a standing workout. You don't have to get
uh,
on your back or anything, and it's hard.
yeah.
It's really hard, so there are some really good quick workouts that you can do, that's true.
I think that this is an article that I read in the New York Times about a similar thing with like it wasn't a snack, but it was like an 8 minute friend phone call, like having a regular 8 minute like standing phone call with friends. It doesn't have to be every day, but like the expectation that the phone call will end in 8 minutes and you just have eight
Mhm.
minutes to connect and say whatever. And it doesn't have to be like you invest all this time and go through everything, that's happened in the past month because you've talked more frequently, but just having that brief connection makes a big difference.
For sure. Feeling connected definitely makes a big difference. So, as far as your research, and you're still in the middle of it, but how can mental health providers and community leaders use your research to better the support of Black and Brown communities?
So, my research, I think, fits in with a growing amount of research that shows that racial trauma is a real thing that needs to be
Mhm.
assessed. Like we need to be checking in about that,
Mhm.
in all different kinds of settings. Medical settings are what I'm most familiar with. And
Yeah.
I think simply having an assessment that is there just to ask people about how frequently they might
Oh,
experience
yeah.
racism. It doesn't take more than a couple minutes. Um,
You're
these
right. That's not included on the typical assessments.
No, it's not, but
Mhm.
it can be really healing for someone just to see that this is something that's like a social determinant of health, that their institution or whatever group that you're in is acknowledging. And if someone is high on
Mhm.
this measure, then you can see like, okay, this is something we need to pay attention to. They may be dealing with a lot of, let's say, internalized anger or emotion. We need to sort of deal with that.
Mhm.
So I think that having conversations around this is key. So that could be in the context of community centers. It could be in churches, describing how people experience it and allowing them the space to talk about it
Yeah.
is going to make a difference. Naming the problem is a big part of the healing. I think that also connecting around it, in community settings, allowing people to share about their experiences and uplift one another, I think can be
Yeah.
healing. But staying quiet is part of the oppression.
That's part of
Like
the oppression.
the silence is part of the oppression, and not, avoiding it, not discussing it means that we're not treating it like the threat that it is. We talk
Yeah.
about smoking and alcohol and all these things all day long,
Mhm.
and we have something that could be potentially even more powerful, a determinant of health, and it's not discussed anywhere. So we need to actually talk about it.
Yeah, and honestly, in these last several years, in the political environment that provides obvious is that it's happening and taking away DEI and all those things, it's
Yeah.
kind of like making us have a voice because it's like so obvious that it's happening. Like in recent decades, we've been feeling oppressed and no one talks about it. Hush, hush. No, you're not getting discriminated. Now it's pretty obvious. Like, oh, discriminated, discriminated.
It's like
but people are talking about it now.
Ironically, now is the time that it becomes so blatant. Like it's just,
it's like, really?
I think maybe a couple of years ago, we were talking a lot more about microaggressions and subtle forms of discrimination, but now the quiet part is being said out loud all the time. And it's turning into something very different.
Yeah,
and the threats are becoming also a lot more physical.
Yes. Well, I appreciate your research. So if somebody wanted to enroll in that study, where would they go?
They can just go to my website, which is my name, negarfani.com. And we have several studies going on. We have 2 intervention studies. So part of my work is actually healing-oriented work. Part of the work is sort of understanding how racial trauma affects the brain. So any one of the studies people are interested in, they can click the button and join.
Well, I have to ask for the incentives because, some people, they'll do it just because, but most people want the incentive. What are the incentives?
So there's monetary incentives. Depends on how much how much you get is different for each of the studies. But I will say that each one of the studies has a feedback component. So I like to show people their data. Both with our intervention studies and with the racial trauma research, you get to see your own individual data. So I show charts of, how this trauma has affected your particular brain. With our intervention studies, we show people changing over time and things like their heart rate going down, that they're able to sort of regulate themselves a lot more effectively. So you get to see your own data, I think, which is really powerful. But a couple $100 also can't hurt.
Exactly. That sounds cool. And we can also find you on, you said this is called
Blue Sky. So I'm on Blue Sky. It's kind of a Twitter alternative.
I'm also not on Twitter, so maybe that's why.
So yeah, but you can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there.
Yeah, with your name. Yes, you are.
Yeah, fortunately, having an unusual name makes it easier for people to find me. So
yeah, there's no others. So
a very pretty name.
Yeah. Well, I need to point out what we've been talking about here. We've been talking about resilience. We've been talking about social connectedness and making sure you have some surrounding community, family, friends, community who can validate you. And we've been obviously talking about mindfulness and mental health and physical health. And if you're wondering, well, gee, what is one thing where I can have this self-awareness and focus on all these health areas? Your girl has the Enjoyno, Nurturing Authentic Living, that helps you balance your mental, physical, financial, aspirational, and social health. You probably forgot about it. It's still there. Amazon, as well as my website at drenjoylife.com for just $35. So don't forget about that book. And before I let you go, Dr. Fani, I ask all my guests what your personal journey to joy has been like. So please share.
Oh my gosh, I love that question. I think it's been multifaceted. So I think you can see some of the things that bring me joy. So that mandolin up there is like my project. I'm learning how to play the mandolin. I think music is something that brings me an immense amount of joy. And I listen to all different kinds of music and I try to produce music. But honestly, some of the biggest joy comes from my husband and son. They are the absolute best. We just went on vacation to Panama and had a blast. I think the joy of spending time with them is like none other. And they validate me and help me heal and keep me moving forward. And one of the biggest compliments I'd ever received in my life was my son, who's almost 11 now, telling me that he wanted to be a clinical neuropsychologist when he
No way. Oh, that's right. He's almost 11, so he's able to say it too.
Yeah. And he did a project in school where he talked about it. And I was like, are you sure you want to do this? Because he gets to see the hard parts too. And I was inspired that despite all the hard parts he sees, he wants to do it. So I'm I adore them. And it brings me joy to work with people day in and day out, both my lab members who they really keep the fire burning. But our research participants are truly amazing. They, every time I talk to people about their experiences in the study, I just feel so inspired that I get to see all the different ways in which people thrive in the face of adversity. Like they're just, it's a gift to be able to do this work. It's a gift that people trust me enough to do this with me. And I don't know, I couldn't be in a better place. This is a hard time in terms of the research community. The scientific world is pretty short. And it's, every day I don't take for granted the ability to keep going with this work. Like I really do feel blessed. So all of these things together bring me a tremendous amount of joy, including talking to you today. This was really wonderful.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm glad to have you. Your research is amazing. Hopefully people go to your website and become a participant in your study. This has been great. Thank you everyone for tuning in on Juneteenth. Joy is your resistance. So fight for your joy. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you, Dr. Enjoy.
You're welcome. This has been an Enjoy Life production. If you're in a crisis, don't hesitate. Call, text, or chat 988 for immediate support. Please note, this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional treatment. If you're looking for therapy or medication management through Enjoy Life, visit www.drenjoylife.com to request a consultation. I'm licensed in 12 states. I accept Aetna in Georgia, Florida, and Virginia. Be sure to grab your copy of the Enjoy Note to help you on your wellness journey. Also check out Inspired Joy for the wife, mom, boss to help you balance it all without losing yourself. Better yet, get the full Joy bundle for just $45. Remember, Journey to Joy Live is every Thursday at 7 p.m. Thank you for joining me, and until next time, may you continue to transform stress into joy.